Hi, everybody. It's good to talk to you again. It looks like we'll be doing this for a little while yet, even though the governor started to relax a few things with the COVID-19. We are the vulnerable group that really probably needs to stay home, so we're going to continue doing these messages, and we'll get together again on Mondays via Zoom and via phone to stay connected with each other. But I just wanted to share a few thoughts that I had with you today. As I was doing some research on another project that I was working on, I came across a story. And the story was about a teenage young man, and his dad was a deacon in the church. And one day he was talking with his dad, and he was making fun of the music that was in church. And he said, "That is just old fuddy-duddy stuff, and I really don't think that's reaching our generation." And his dad kind of sarcastically said, "Well, make your own music then." And so this young man did, and he decided that he would make some of his own music and even published his own songbook. But that sounds like could be happening today, but actually the year was 1692, and the young man was Isaac Watts, who is the great the father of English hymnody is his title that usually gets given to him. And so even back then, there was still some concerns over music stuff. So he then began to write music, and he went on to become a pastor, but his health wasn't very good. So after a few years of doing that, he had to retire, basically, and he spent the last 35 years of his life just being an invalid in staying with someone else in someone else's house and writing songs. And what that made me think about was one of the songs that he wrote. And one of his most famous songs is "When I Survey the Wondrous Cross." I just want to reflect on that with you just a little bit. That song is based on Galatians 6, verse 14. And Galatians 6:14 says this. This is Paul writing. He says, "As for me, may I never boast about anything except the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ. Because of that cross, my interest in this world has been crucified, and the world's interest in me has also died." Paul is concluding his book to the Galatians, and he's been talking about through the whole book about how you can't get salvation from works. And he's saying some people want to boast about their works and that they're proud of those things. And he says, the only thing that I really want to be proud of is what Jesus did for me on that cross. So Isaac Watts used that verse to write as the basis for his song. And back then I had said that they were only usually singing psalms, and the music to the psalms were not so great. According to Isaac Watts anyway. And so he began to write new lyrics because he wanted to sing stuff out of the New Testament as well as just out of the Old Testament Psalms. And this is one of those songs that he wrote that just praises God for who he is and what he does on the cross. And he just gives praise to God for that. He says, "When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and pour contempt on all my pride." When we look at what Jesus did for us on the cross, and then we look at what we do, we can see, we cannot earn our own salvation. We can't get ourselves to heaven. We need to depend on Jesus to do that. And that's a great comfort, because I don't know about you, but sometimes I don't always do things right. And I need to have that grace that God gives me so that I can be certain of my salvation, not because of what I've done, but because of what Jesus has done for me. This song is a great testament to what Jesus done, and he uses some great language to talk about what Jesus did for us. And this Sunday, we're going to be celebrating communion online. And so I would encourage you guys to go to the Faithy's website at faithy.org and find the communion button, which will be on there. And I will also send out an email invitation to that probably on Saturday. That'll be Sunday night at 6:30. We're all going to gather kind of around the computer screen, and we will have the communion service together. For those folks who cannot go to church, we're actually going to invite a few folks into church if they want to come in and socially distance with all of the necessary things, that they can be able to do that. But for our age group, that's not really what we should be doing. We should be still staying home. So we're going to be doing that online for those folks who would like to be celebrate communion, but yet do that together online in the safety of our homes. So the language that Watts describes what Jesus did, he says, "See from his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. Did e'er such love and sorrow meet, or thorns compose so rich a crown?" Jesus' suffering on the cross was bittersweet. It was hard. It was horrible. It was a horrible death. But yet through that death, Jesus bought our salvation. And so Jesus conquered sin and death, and therefore he is the king of sin and death. Therefore he has the crown that he can claim victory over sin and death. And he does that on our behalf. When Watts was in his later years, he was confined to his home too, or the home of a friend actually, and yet he was extremely productive. Even though he was an invalid, he still made over 750 hymns that he wrote. And so even though sometimes we can be secluded in our homes, we do not have to be invalids. We can be productive. And you guys are doing a great job of that. You're connecting with each other. Some of you are sewing masks. Some of you are making quilts. Some of you are just making sure that everybody is staying connected with each other and calling each other. Those are all great things that you're being super productive to do. Just like Isaac Watts was productive in his time, our challenge is to be productive in the time that God gives us. And who would have known that for Isaac Watts that he thought, oh man, I can't do ministry anymore. But yet his ministry was so much more far-reaching with what he did when he wasn't in the pulpit than when he was sitting in his office or in his home writing songs that we still remember today, that are some of our favorites. The Apostle Paul and Watts reflects the response to what Jesus did for us. And Watts describes it this way. He says, "Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were a present far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, and my all." God's great sacrifice for us asks us to respond to him in obedience and in submission to him and to what he wants us to do. Once when this song was sung in back in the 1700s in one of the English cathedrals, they sang that song, and the last line goes, "Demands my soul, my life, my all." And the pastor at the time repeated that line to his congregation, and he said, "You know, you sang that hymn very, very well, but the collection plate only had $15 in it. Do you think that's your soul, your life, and your all?" And I think they probably passed it again. We don't know the rest of that story. But the point is that God expects us to respond in gratitude and obedience to him. And we don't have to, but in response to what God has done for us, we can certainly sacrifice for him. And that looks different for each of us. Sometimes it's loneliness that we're sacrificing, the camaraderie of being around other people, and sometimes it's sacrificing our finances, sometimes it's sacrificing our time, whatever that is. Sometimes for us it requires to be godly that we actually maybe stay home, and that we adhere to the governor's advice to stay safe. And those are things that we all need to be able to evaluate and say, okay, what's the right thing for us to do? Through this passage, Paul challenges us to live lives that are pleasing to God. We need to recognize what God has done for us, and out of that, we live lives of gratitude for him. Hopefully, you guys will be able to join us as we celebrate communion on Sunday. If you can't, hopefully you can join us on Monday when we get together via Zoom. And I'll be sending out email invitations to, if you're on the Faith Builders email list, I'll get you that invitation to be able to go and do that. In the meantime, You guys have a great week. We'll talk to you soon.